I'm Candace. Sitting in my cozy apartment above the flower shop, the smell of chicken soup with thyme and garlic filling the air, I'm reminded of how far I've come. It was just a year ago that I sat in a cold courtroom, facing my son, Jake, and his now ex-wife, Lily, in an eviction case. The courtroom was stuffy, with a faint smell of dust and old papers. My hands trembled as I stood in line at security, not out of fear of losing, but of facing the boy I once raised. When I walked in, Jake looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days, and Lily's eyes were cold with anger. They didn't even notice me at first. The judge reviewed the case, and Jake's lawyer argued about financial hardship and unfair rent hikes. It was surreal to hear my own son painted as a victim when he'd once turned a blind eye to my suffering. When it was our turn, Mr. Thompson, the lawyer who handled my late husband's estate, presented the documents, proof of ownership, payment records, and contracts. The judge ruled in my favor, ordering eviction in 30 days. After the hearing, Mr. Thompson asked if I wanted to speak to Jake. Outside, I found him sitting on a concrete step, his head in his hands. For a moment, I saw the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees. When he looked up and called me Mom, I didn't know what to say at first. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he asked. I replied softly, "Why didn't you ask if I was okay?" His flinch told me he understood. He admitted he didn't want to lose Lily, and now he felt like he'd lost everything. I told him he hadn't lost everything, he just had to start over. As I look back, it all started on a cold Sunday afternoon. I was born into a simple family in Seattle. My parents were hard-working folks. My father was a carpenter, a quiet and kind man who taught me the value of hard work and integrity. My mother was a homemaker, with a warm heart and a talent for making a house a home. I married my husband, Henry, at a young age. We were both passionate about education, and we worked as teachers in the local school. Our life was filled with simplicity and love. Henry was the most thoughtful man. He always planned ahead, and he loved my chicken soup, which I'd make using a family recipe passed down from my mother. One fateful Sunday, I was standing in the kitchen, stirring the soup just like I always did. The smell of thyme and garlic filled the air, a smell that once represented home. Lily stormed in, her high heels clicking on the floor. She wrinkled her nose and snapped, "Who cooks like that?" Before I could respond, she yanked the ladle from my hand, and the boiling soup splashed on the back of my head. Jake was in the living room. Instead of rushing in to check on me, he turned up the TV volume. The silence that followed was deafening. Lily told me to pack my things, saying I'd done enough. I looked at Jake, hoping for a sign of the loving son I'd raised, but he never looked up. With a heavy heart, I packed a single suitcase, Henry's photo, and a small envelope he'd given me years ago. The note inside read, "Everything you'll ever need is already yours." I didn't understand its meaning then, but it would change my life. That night, I sat on a bus stop bench, the city around me oblivious to my pain. My scalp throbbed, and the smell of burned soup clung to my coat. I took the last bus downtown, not knowing where to go, but grateful that the driver didn't ask questions. I ended up at a 24-hour diner. The waitress gave me a pitying look as I ordered coffee that I couldn't finish. When the diner closed, I found a bench outside the library and tried to sleep, whispering to Henry, asking him what to do. The next day, I realized my $200 savings were disappearing fast. The cheapest motel wanted $75 a night, cash only. I was too ashamed to stay. I tried the city shelter, but it was full. A woman with a baby at the bus terminal shared crackers with me, and I gave her half of mine. When I tried to buy a bottle of water from the vending machine and it swallowed my money, I almost laughed. It felt like the world was against me. On the third morning, hunger got the better of me. I followed the smell of soup to a small church. A kind-hearted priest named Father Mark gave me soup and bread. When he noticed the envelope I was clutching, I told him it was from Henry, unopened since his funeral. Henry had said to open it when life got too heavy. Father Mark suggested it might be time. That night, in a quiet bus shelter, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Henry's shaky handwriting and 13 property deeds, all in my name. One of the addresses was Jake and Lily's house. I was furious at myself for letting others decide my worth for so long. The next day, I went to a legal office. Mr. Thompson, a silver-haired lawyer, explained that Henry had invested in foreclosed duplexes 20 years ago through a small firm. He'd refinanced and built passive income, and after his death, the accounts continued under my name. I was the owner of Harborline Holdings, and I'd been letting property managers handle everything. I was shocked to learn that I'd been homeless in a city where I owned half the block. Mr. Thompson told me I didn't have to feel guilty, and the question was what I wanted to do next. Over the next few weeks, I learned how to manage my properties. I found out that Jake and Lily had been paying only a fraction of the normal rent for years. I decided to update the rent to the market value, not for revenge, but for fairness. When Lily called, furious about the rent increase, I stood my ground. As the days passed, other tenants paid their rent on time, but Jake and Lily didn't. I received a notice of rent delinquency and forwarded it to Mr. Thompson. He advised me that I could file for eviction, and I decided to do it by the book. As I waited for the eviction process to unfold, I kept a simple routine. I went back to the church one Sunday, and Father Mark noticed I looked different. I told him I'd learned to stand up for myself. He asked if I'd forgiven them, and I said I was learning that forgiveness meant not letting people hurt me twice. A month after the eviction notice, I received a letter from Jake. He wrote that he knew he'd failed me, that he was working night shifts at the docks, and that he thought of the soup every time he smelled garlic. He didn't expect forgiveness but hoped I was eating well. Now, as I sit here, watching the snow fall outside my window, I think about how life has come full circle. The apartment is filled with the warm smell of soup, and I no longer feel like a ghost in my own story. I've found myself, and I've learned that justice and grace can coexist. One Sunday morning, there was a knock on the gate. When I opened it, Jake stood there, holding a paper bag. "Hi, Mom," he said. "I made soup. Thought you might like some." We sat at the kitchen table, and he told me about his life. Lily had left, and he was starting over. He apologized for that night, and I told him he couldn't change the past but could live differently from now on. He asked if he could come again next Sunday and make soup with me. I smiled and told him to bring the time. As he left, I watched him cross the street, his shoulders looking lighter. For the first time in years, mine did too. I placed fresh yellow roses, Henry's favorite, beside his photograph. I whispered to him, "You were right. Everything I ever needed was already mine, and this time, I truly believe it."